welcome to TEFAF New York Fall. We're delighted to have you all here for this discussion. First of all, I'm Michael Plummer. I'm one of the directors of the fair, and we're delighted to have the turnout that we have both for this event and to the fair itself. And we hope all of you are enjoying this very special occasion of this wonderful art and what we're referring to as our own little pop-up museum. In that vein, we have the Rijksmuseum, a real museum with an installation upstairs, and I hope all of you either have gone or will go to see the exhibition of Segers, and it's a great influence on Rembrandt, and I think you should see it for yourselves, and of course it's going to be the subject of discussion here today, among other things. So let me start by introducing Thomas Marks, the editor of Apollo and Apollo Magazine and TEFAF New York, and TEFAF New York's predecessor Spring Masters have all had close relationships with Apollo. And Taco Dibbits, the director of the Rijksmuseum, and they're going to have a question and answer amongst themselves, a discussion, and hopefully throw out a few controversies and get everyone excited.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. We've got to throw out a few controversies now. Where to start, Taco? What we're going to do is speak for about perhaps half an hour, 35 minutes, and then hopefully open the floor as well to some questions for Taco. And in fact, two things really we want to cover is thinking about where the Rijksmuseum is now, where it is with a new general director, and what the Segers show means to the Rijksmuseum and what it means that it's going to be coming to the Met in February next year. So Taco, you've been at the Rijksmuseum since 2002, is that right? When you joined as curator of 17th century paintings, and you've climbed up the ladder, and this year in May you became the general director. How did it feel to become the general director of the Rijksmuseum?
Well, that's right. I joined the museum when it closed. So the first question was, why on earth do you apply for this job? We're closing. And I said, yes, that's why. Because you never get the chance to completely reinvent a museum, a national museum. And when I was taking a cab to the airport in the Netherlands, the taxi driver started to talk, and he was a young guy, and he asked me, so what do you do? I said, I work in a museum, and then we continued talking. And then he said, at a certain point, he said, well, so you say you started next to the copying machine and then made it to director. Oh, so that's the American dream, isn't it? And I said, well, I'm going to the States, so that's why. But yeah, no, it feels very good. And the museum is it's such an amazing place.
In particular, you have, I mean, the structure of the Rijksmuseum directorship is there's a sort of council of directors, right? You were among the directors as director of collections previously with your predecessor as general director, Wim Piebs. What does that particularly mean, the transition from director of collections to general director, for someone who might not know the structure and the management of the Rijksmuseum?
Well, in the Netherlands, everything goes with councils. And usually we have a council of 3 directors in the museum. Usually we have councils of like 50 or 60 people, so it's quite democratic. We also always have coalitions in politics, much different from the US at the moment. So you never have a strong polarization. But the transition is, there was a distinction between presentation on the one hand, which was with the general director, and the collection. And I've always been a great advocate that in a museum, by dividing those two, you could also say presentation, communication, by dividing that from the collections, it becomes more difficult to actually communicate with your public what you are doing in collections. So the research, that's what is being done, that's your core business, and that's what you want to communicate. So now, as a director of collections at the head of the museum, you can really be far more direct, and it's a great joy.
For my generation, coming through university and really in the decade afterwards, the Rijksmuseum was always a closed museum. and you were working at a closed museum as director of collections. What type of priorities did you have in that role at that point?
The reinstallation of the galleries. And I think that that's something where we really, as Simon Schama called it, I think, a curatorial revolution. Well, you want some some spicier, so it will be a revolution. But I often compare the museum to a hospital where art is being worked on. You have people who are specialized in glass, you have people who are specialized in paintings. It's also national history, museum history, and they all do their own thing. Like you have with people specialized on brains, people specialized on lungs, etc. And then with the decision to present a collection in a new way, where you really have a trajectory walking through time and meeting the treasures of the Netherlands, in also sometimes with a little peek through the window to the foreign schools. That means that you have to present all the different types of art and artifacts together in one gallery. So it's like being in the operation theater with 15 or 20 doctors. It can be quite a fight, but it had a good result, I hope.
Well, one of the major transitions of the display, at least, with the reopening, the much acclaimed reopening in 2013, it's true to say that the different categories of objects have been now presented together rather than separated out. What motivated that decision, and how successful do you think it has been?
Well, the Rijksmuseum is a very special museum in the sense that it's not only the art museum of the Netherlands, but it's also the museum for history. And in a way, it has both you could say it's a National Gallery and V&A together, in the sense that it has applied arts, but it also has paintings. And it's a museum that has a very national character, the collection does. And we felt that it is also, you could say it has a national character, but you could also say it's, in a sense, the physical memory of the country. And when you organize your own memory, you usually do it by important dates that you have. And at that time, in 2002, when we said, well, if it is the country's memory and you organize it by dates, you will have a chronological display. Well, that was kind of the worst thing you could say for all museologists and studies, that chronology, I mean, isn't that completely out of date? And why would you have chronology? And whole postmodernism idea was against chronology. And we felt, well, it's a very good way in ordering your memories, but also in showing the development of styles in different media, and to give the public, and that was a very strong motto for us, to give the public a sense of time and a sensibility to beauty. And that sounds quite prosaic, but it was of great help when installing the galleries.
Now, a lot of directors come in, they might be parachuted into an institution where they haven't worked for a long time. And of course, you want a big capital project. You want to leave your mark. You want to be a building director, or a lot of directors do. But the Rijksmuseum has reopened. The Kuiper building has been totally revamped, and gloriously so. The Philips wing for exhibitions have opened. So what's your big project?
Well, there's always acquisitions, but I'm not going to tell you. We just bought a great pair of paintings together with France, but we'll talk about them later. The great thing is that we can decide the exhibitions from 2018 onwards. So what the big project we're working on now is setting up the exhibition calendar. And I feel that the Rijksmuseum is a place, also in the Netherlands, for the Dutch people, it's a place where you can show Dutch art also in an international context. So, and in the end, what we want to do is show great art. So.
You're talking about showing great art and the exhibitions, and we'll come on to those, we'll come on to acquisitions. One thing that I noticed quite soon into your time as director was this big announcement of the Netherlands Collection Center, which is going to be a new way, am I right, of thinking about how storage works at the Rijksmuseum?
Well, we've got a collection, we've got about 8,000 objects on view, and we've got a collection of over 1 million objects. And rethinking about what a storage is, I felt that it's very much, the collection of the Rijksmuseum is very much a research collection. So it has also an archival function. If you want to see the history of Dutch chairs and you go to our storage, you can see them from the Middle Ages to the 20th century. The only thing is, well, they're dispersed all over the storage space. And people usually say, well, you can put something in storage anywhere as long as it has the right label on it. And we decided to make the storage and put everything by material, so different from the museum, but in chronological order. So what you will be able to see when you really physically stand in front of the storage shelvings, you can see glass from 800 to the 20th century and Dutch furniture from 800 to the 20th century. So you really get an idea for study. And I think that's I've always dreamt about it as an art historian, and I think it will really help to give an insight. And we will be open for people who want to make an appointment.
I was going to ask how public that would be. There's obviously quite a drive now in a number of museums, certainly in the UK, being led by the V&A, to think about what the possibilities of some sort of open or public storage facility would be, where storage transforms into something that is a display facility.
It's really like a study collection. It's not it won't be a museum. I don't think in your storage that you should necessarily start to kind of play and have a museum there. It's a research collection, so students can come, and people like all of people here, you can come and kind of, or you can study parts of the collection. It just feels the right thing to do because it also gives the collection a relevance. Now we're always asked, the Dutch like their attics clean. We're very different from, for example, the French or the Russians. It's a small country, so it's very practical. And if you don't use something, also in the normal household, you immediately say, well, I haven't used this broomstick for, well, I mean, I have to admit, some I haven't used for 30 years, so I haven't used it. So why should I keep it? Why don't you sell it? Why don't you chuck it away? And that's also a bit the way that our government has always looked at collections. Like if there are too many things, why don't you just sell things from your storage rooms? Where instead, if you go to St. Petersburg, they will open a storage room and they will say, look, we've got 30 paintings by Rembrandts. Aren't we rich? So it's a completely different approach to collections, and to make the collections more relevant, it was really to say, well, if you put the objects in chronological order, then you can learn much more from them.
Well, I want to think about several ways, or talk about several ways in which the collection and the museum reaches beyond the bounds of itself, I suppose. And one of them is a very physical thing this year. You mentioned major acquisitions, the Rembrandt, the pendant portraits of Martin Solmans and Olman Koppit. That's more or less, I hope, their names.
Oopje Koppit. It's a very nice name. I hope that this year a lot of people will call their newborns Oopje.
So, Martin and Oopje are partly owned in Holland and partly owned by the French state. Is that right?
Yeah.
And this is a 160 million euro acquisition made jointly by two countries, which is really quite a revolutionary type of purchase.
I think it's even the first acquisition made by two states of art. So you have international museums, but this is it's two countries buying art together. And the nice thing is there's even a treaty between the two countries about these portraits. So that shows their importance. And it's also nice that it's about art. And not usually treaties are about tunnels or kind of gutters or things like that. And this time it's about art, which is much nicer.
Can you tell me a little bit, take us through the narrative of how that came about, and also in that treaty how that acquisition is protected if, say, there is an upheaval in geopolitical situation?
Yeah. Well, I never advertised, but I have to say it came about because of TEFAF. There was last year, or 2 years ago, there was a beautiful painting by Jan Asselijn of a storm in the Netherlands and the breaking of one of the dikes. And the Rijksmuseum acquired the painting. And you obviously, like a lot of people, you have something on Google that when your name comes up of the museum, you kind of get the information. And there was an article, I think it was in Le Figaro, which said it's incredible. The best thing at TEFAF is being bought by the Dutch. And how can it be that we, France, a big country in Europe, do not buy these type of works? And it ended saying, and it ended by saying, probably the Dutch will even buy our Rembrandts, the Rothschild Rembrandts. And I didn't know anything, and nobody knew anything about them being maybe on the market. So I immediately started calling. And one of my friends with whom I shared an office when I used to work at Christie's is not very, I mean, he's very good at lying, or at least he thinks he's very good at lying. And he said, no, I'm really sorry, I don't know anything about it. I said, come on, I know you longer. And he admitted that they were actually, they had just the day before signed the agreement to sell the paintings privately. That evening, press was calling immediately. What's this? What's happening? Are these paintings for sale? You have to realize that in the Netherlands, Rembrandt is a national hero. I mean, he's like our royal family or our Dutch football team, who are even less. The players in the football team are less known than Rembrandt. So Rembrandt is really a national hero.
Well, that might be the state of the football team at the moment.
Let's not get into that. But I mean, in America, they're not too good either. So, so in the evening, I had to go on telly and I had to prepare, like, what are you going to say? And I thought the best thing to do is just to be as honest as possible and say, well, it would be an absolute dream to have these two. They're two full-length paintings, and there's only in total 3 full-length standing paintings are known, and one is in a museum in Kassel. So these are the only 2 full-length paintings. So I said it on the television. It's a dream, but and I have no idea how we're ever going to raise 160 million, because it's such a huge amount, and that started everything. And I would say that the rest is history. But I learned a lot from it. It's also fascinating to work with the French. At a certain point, it became, you obviously have, when you've got 3 R's, the Rembrandt, the Rothschilds, and the Rijksmuseum, it's very hard to keep it a secret. And the French said, well, we feel Rembrandt is as much French as he is Dutch. And then we decided, actually it was decided here in New York at the UN summit. It was decided by Hollande and by our Prime Minister to buy the 2 together. And there we are. It's a great thing that you can see them now, 8 years in the Netherlands and 8 years in France. They're happily married. I hope they will stay happily married too. And now the Louvre and the Rijksmuseum are also married. I'd never thought I would have a wife of that importance.
I was going to say we would be looking out for, not suggesting that François Hollande is going to have any more children, but little options sprouting up in Paris rather than in Amsterdam.
I think his chances are pretty slim. So.
But I wanted to ask you as well about some of the other ways that the museum reaches beyond its walls, because something that the Rijksmuseum really has led on in the last 5-6 years, I suppose, is access to its collections online and the digitization of the collection and the Rijksstudio website. Often also the idea of what those images can be used for. Now, why is it, how has it come about that the Rijksmuseum has become such a world leader in the availability and the open access of the things in its collection?
I just want to come back 1 second about the Rembrandt portraits, and it is about accessibility, is that you acquire these portraits, and in this case, we usually, when the Rijksmuseum does acquisitions, we have a fantastic group of supporters who give money to buy works of art. But in this case, it was the state who bought. So really the people, all the 17 million people, we're a small country, but the 17 million people in the Netherlands who pay taxes contributed to these works. So they're as much theirs as there are the Rijksmuseum's. And we felt that you have to also make them like icons, like people have to really, they have to touch them and they have to enclose them in their hearts. And a way to do that is also through children. So we had one of our donors who said, I would really like you to make a newspaper for children, just a small newspaper, only about these two works, and in a way that children can understand it, present it to them. And we printed for each child in the Netherlands, we printed one of these, and I went to present the first at a school, and everybody always says, oh, children, and they're children they were around 10, 11 years old. Everybody always says, oh, children are not interested in old art and they're bored, etc. But these children loved it. It was just the way it was presented in such a playful way. We asked two Dutch vloggers who are a couple as well, and they were dressed up in kind of 21st century, very kind of rich clothes, and the children kind of immediately made the connection and understood it. So it's really, how do you make great artists of all times, and it's very contemporary, and you have to also bring it like it is contemporary. And I think we have to believe in great works of art instead of being insecure and say, well, it's not very popular. Once we start saying it, then nobody, I mean, then we're lost.
Well, tell me about the Rijksstudio, because something is that maybe it is a Dutch thing. There's quite a kind of a great sympathy with a sort of enterprising spirit and an entrepreneurialism. Seems to go back. It's a sort of golden age, always a golden age at the Rijksmuseum.
Well, it's in a way what I said about the Rembrandts belonging to everybody. It's the same with the entire collection. The collection of the Rijksmuseum belongs not only to the Dutch, but I think that we can quite confidently say that Dutch art is also world heritage. So we really felt that not everybody's able to come to the Rijksmuseum, but they should at least have access to the best images that we can produce and the best research we can do. And they should have access to that through the internet. So we set off on a project with the aim within the coming 5 years to have the whole collection digitized, so over 1 million objects. There's now a team which for the Rijksmuseum is substantial of nearly 30 people working on that day and night to do it. And the rest was entrepreneurial. We thought if you pay, I think we're paying 3 or 4 people to trace photographs for copyright. They would find them after very long searches on the internet. They would find them, and if you then calculate how much they earn and how much money they got in through the copyright, well, it was kind of a break even. So we thought it's much better if people can download the highest resolution images, and it's a fantastic free publicity for us.
I mean, I say as a magazine editor, it means we're happy we'll put the Rijksmuseum in every month because we don't have to pay you for the images.
It's everywhere on the cover. You see it, the way that also school children use it for their projects at school.
But I think also encouraging design, because you've set up this Rijksstudio prize, and that's an effort. And if people want to design jewelry or lamps or think about innovative things to do with art that can be 500 years old, that's what's happening with the Rijksmuseum collection.
Yeah, because also there was a very simple principle. So it's the art is free on the internet because it belongs to everybody, and the other principle is, I remember when you study history of art, but probably most of you have done it in the past, when you read something interesting, you start to clip the article from the newspaper and you put it away in a file somewhere, and when you need it, you don't know where to find it because your desk is a mess. But the action of actually clipping the article has imprinted the image in your mind. So we thought that every museum is digitizing, and there are thousands, millions, billions of images on the internet. But once you allow people to do something with them. For example, as an artist did with this small film he made on Hercules Segers, then you remember it better. So, and it's a great thing to see that people start to come up with all kind of fantastic things and make their art by copying, by cutting, by pasting. And in the end, they want to come to the Rijksmuseum and they buy the ticket. So that's also a good thing. They want to come to the Rijksmuseum because they want to see the real thing.
And even that film is quite an innovative thing to do, an innovative way of, at a fair where there's object after object after object, and it's the focus of an art fair, but to present an exhibition with a film. Let's come on to the exhibition program, because you said it's what you're really trying to fix down now. How can, in a time of endless temporary exhibitions, every institution trying to put on the big blockbuster or do something different, how can the Rijksmuseum distinguish itself and its international exhibition program from everything else that's happening?
I think focus. It's very important to present. You see, most people go to a museum and they walk through the galleries and then also visit an exhibition. So they've already seen quite a lot. And we really have a principle which is less is more. I now set out that I know I will I know that I won't entirely win the battle, but I hope partly. I said the exhibition program, which is now being developed also by our curators, I said one of the things is you cannot have more than 50 objects. Well, that's obviously blasphemy for anybody who wants to make an exhibition. But it does give you the possibility, what we did with late Rembrandt as well, it gives you the possibility to focus on a few objects. People are not overwhelmed, they actually really look. And I think that that's something that that will be quite different from what you see in other museums.
I actually bumped into Taco in an exhibition somewhere in this city this morning, and the first thing he said to me was, there are too many objects here. So actually, it's really interesting. You can guess.
Don't tell which, but I didn't come out a holy man.
I'm not going to reveal which museum we might spend our mornings in. But let's talk a little bit more about the Segers and thinking about this exhibition and how it's being presented and what's the discoveries that have been made, because I think it says interesting things about the connoisseurial work that is going on at the Rijksmuseum too. So first of all, what is the significance of this particular exhibition for our understanding of this very enigmatic artist?
Well, when I joined the museum in 2002, the plan to make an exhibition on Segers was already there. And one of the great things we had to do was to fence off everybody who wanted to organize an exhibition on Segers. For the Rijksmuseum, that's not too difficult, because the majority, there are only around 180 works known by Segers, of which the majority are prints. And we really felt we have to show it in the new Rijksmuseum, and we have to show the artist at his best. The fascinating thing with Segers is that I say prints, but every print is in a way a little painting. So it's an exhibition where you will, you as you've seen upstairs as a teaser, the reason why we only have one work of art there is because they're now all in Amsterdam. So that was also why we brought this work, and I wanted to bring a work that shows his importance also to a public who doesn't know them. I don't think that we have to dumb down, but you do have to reach out to people and get them in. And in this sense, to have a print, a Segers print, which has then been worked up by Rembrandt, you have the name Rembrandt, so people their attention is immediately drawn to it, and then you can start to explain about Segers. And he's just one of the most amazing artists, so we felt we have to do it. So
one thing that I've noticed is that actually these two exhibitions that are running concurrently now at the Rijksmuseum, you've got these rediscovered drawings that were discovered in the archive in Haarlem of Frans Post from his time in Brazil with Johan Moritz, and you've got the Segers exhibition, both to a degree quite connoisseurial interest, works on paper, things that have a lot of academic research around them, but you've been able to promote them as both an exhibition about adventure and the journey to Brazil, and an exhibition about mystery and discovery and enigma. There's no really a question in that, but
No,
I think
I think research is at the basis of what we do in a museum, and it's hugely important. And what is often people often tend to forget is that the public is really interested in discoveries. I mean, we all love Sherlock Holmes, so why not love discoveries that you make in art? And the people in the press office said you will never. I mean, why are you approaching the New York Times about new Hercules Segers paintings? Well, of course you are, because although nobody knows who Hercules Segers is, they love the idea of a discovery. And if Hercules Segers is, and I will say a bit more about Hercules Segers. He is the most, and I hate the word because it's a kind of fashionable word, but he is the most innovative artist of the 17th century in the Netherlands before Rembrandt. And that's also, I think, why Rembrandt loved him so much. He owned 8 works by him, so you could say he was Rembrandt's favorite artist. And Segers did everything that God had forbidden with etching. I mean, he was a painter, so you have to imagine in a painter's studio he started etching. So where up to that date, over 100 years, people were using ink to do their etching with, he started to use the acid and to make effects, what 20th century engravers or etchers also do, to create effects with the acid. He then wouldn't print, he would print with ink and would think, well, what if I print twice the same thing? And then you move a little bit the plate and you suddenly get a certain depth. Then he would think, well, let's add some color. And he would start to put oil paint on his printing plate and start to print with oil paint. Even we usually use only oil, so without pigment, to clean your plates. And he started then to print only with oil and then work on it. And he would work on it by painting over it, by having a ground layer with oil. And he really, I think he was looking for a way to be faster at his painting. So he was looking for a way to reproduce his paintings and to still have them look like paintings. And what do you need then? Then you need to print on canvas. So he was the first to take his shirts. We always thought this was a kind of myth. And he was the first to take his shirts and the bed linen from his linen cupboard. And his wife started to complain. We know Samuel Hoogstraat, who wrote in the 17th century, wrote about it. But through research now, we found that, yes, he did really use his shirts. And he did really use the bed linen and everything he could get in his studio to create these very mysterious landscapes. And Dutch art is famous for its realism. And what the Segers do at the moment that everybody was kind of drawing around the Rhine, he makes the most mysterious kind of nearly Tolkien-like landscapes with mountains which he'd never seen and creates really a fantasy world. And that's, I think, what made him for Rembrandt so attractive, that there was this endless experiment with materials, but also in his subjects, his fantastical landscapes. He was also endlessly experimenting.
He disappeared from view, though, after Rembrandt collecting of his work and so on, and rediscovered, I guess, around the turn of the 20th century by Berde and then others, which means there's still a lot of work to do on him. And you said that there have been some amazing discoveries. As much as another 25% paintings have been added to the
There were 12
oeuvre.
paintings known by him, and now we have 17. I mean, that's quite a good score, I think.
Not bad for one exhibition.
But it's also always, when you open the exhibition, we now have we're adding one painting in the Netherlands to it, because it was newly discovered as well. But he completely disappeared from view, probably because most of his prints after his death were kept together. That's also why the Rijksmuseum has such a large collection of them. And because the others were used as little paintings. So people had them hanging in their houses, and yeah, the paper is like with a lot of prints that were hanging in houses, they are not capped. So I think that was one of the reasons why we didn't know about him. And Bode, yeah, the story is fantastic. Bode is put in front of a painting by Segers, which was then attributed to Rembrandt. And he's asked by a Danish collector, if I remember well, and he's very young, Bode is very young, he asks, so whom do you think this is by? And no painting by Segers was known at that time. And Bode kind of, after sweating and being very nervous, being tested, says it is Segers, and yeah, there he was, and that really re-established Segers. And then Egbert Haverkamp-Begeman in the 60s wrote this fantastic book on Segers, and that made him also into a favorite artist for modern artists. So a lot of French artists post World War got really interested in him. I think there was a few years ago, Werner Herzog did a piece at the biennial here. So
he's been talking about Segers in London only at the London Film Festival in the last couple of weeks. His obsession, I suppose, with those rockscapes as well. And I wanted to ask you on that particular point, because on the film upstairs, forgive me if I misquote slightly, but I think John Malkovich does the voiceover. In itself, quite a sort of wacky or weird thing. I mean, associated with all sorts of eccentricities, and talks about these avant-garde. Hang on a minute. What have we called them? Avant-garde wonderlands. And I wonder, obviously we get a lot of this now. We get a lot of this. Look how contemporary this 17th century artist was, or is. Is it reasonable to say this about Segers?
well, Wonderland, I think it's what you also find with people talk about kind of dreamy landscapes. I don't think that, I mean, lots of dreams were thought to be visions. I think life was very religious at that time, so it was really about, they're wonderlands, but they're also about the creation of what God could have possibly made. I think when you try to force it too much, it doesn't work. But in the case of Segers, it is so much about looking for all the possibilities that the mind can create, that I think it's reasonable to say that he feels very contemporary to our eyes now. It doesn't mean that I'm always charmed, or that I think that it's always effective to show, for example, contemporary art with old art. I think it's an illusion to think that in that way you make old art more contemporary. I think you just have to say over and over again, also show that all great art has been contemporary, and it is still of now.
Because there is a concurrent exhibition, I think, at the Rembrandt House of contemporary artists who might either relate to Segers or have been inspired by him. But I do think it's interesting that it takes place in different physical space from the Rijksmuseum exhibition. Is that quite a deliberate decision or collaboration?
We first thought, let's combine it, but one, it would become very strong, very big as an exhibition in itself. But also I think it's nice that you have this break. When you go there and you've seen the Segers exhibition, then it's like an artist going back, a 20th century artist going back to his studio and then being inspired by Segers' works like him. So I think it's nice to have that distance.
At least you haven't got an exhibition of Tracy Emin's bed linen next to Hercules Segers' bed linen or something. I said we would talk. If
he would have got hold of it, he would definitely use it for his prints.
It could be a better use for it, but I won't make a comment on that. We said we were going to do a Q&A session as well, and we have got about 10 minutes, I think, if anyone has got any questions for Taco now. Paul.
Yeah, we start with an exhibition.
Sorry, I just will repeat the question, which is, was it that both portraits are going to be on display, both the Rembrandt pendant portraits, for 8 years at each museum and then move together to the other museum for 8 years?
We're now restoring them at the Rijksmuseum. Then they will be on show with us for 3 months. And then 3 months in Paris. And after that it will be 8 years, 8 years, 8 years. So they're coming back in, after 3 months to us, and then we will have them for 8 years. And then they will have them for 8 years. You don't want to also within a marriage, you don't want to travel too much.
I mean, this is something, there are precedents now. There are the Titian's Poesia moving from Scotland bound to London.
But
and there are arrangements with
they're
private
still
collectors
voted
too.
in, the Scots.
We won't talk about that either. Any other questions?
Yeah, I did not discover them.
Sorry, just because the question. There's the recent discovery, these cache of drawings, animal drawings, studies largely by Frans Post, which is the other exhibition running concurrently with Segers now at the Rijksmuseum. And the question was really to say a little bit more about that discovery.
I didn't discover them. They were discovered by the archivist in Haarlem. And you have to know the archives in Haarlem have been much researched because a lot of Dutch artists in the 17th century came from Haarlem. So the Getty Provenance Index did a huge survey there in the 80s, etc., etc. But Haarlem also decided to digitize their archives. And when you digitize, you really begin by with the first box and then go through the entire archive systematically. And they suddenly found a box with, I think, 34 drawings that nobody had ever seen, nobody had ever studied. And the guy thought, well, they were in amazing condition because they'd always been stacked in a pack away. And the archivist thought, well, very nice drawings and liked them. And then after 2 weeks was in the Rijksmuseum on a Saturday afternoon and saw in one of her paintings of Brazil, he saw the animals that he had seen on these drawings. And I think he then really loudly shouted the F word and said, like, this is Eureka.
Frans Post.
Frans Post, yeah. Because it's an amazing, I mean, these are the earliest drawings of animals made in Brazil. And they are incredible, they're really precise, they're nearly forensic drawings. We decided to exhibit them together with, I don't know how you could say in English, but with stuffed animals from our Natural History Museum. So you can really make the comparison of what the Frans Post registered. And it's also great because children absolutely love it to see these drawings and the animals. And but he must have killed the animals before drawing them, because they're so precisely registered that you can't do that with an anteater who's just running around. But they're amazing drawings, watercolors, and yeah, it's for art history. It's a very important find because we didn't have any animal drawing by Frans Post. They were just non-known. So suddenly you now realize how the artist, when he came back to the Netherlands, must have composed his Brazilian views. So it's very exciting.
Any further questions? Well, in which case, just leaves it to me, I think, to say thank you very much to Taco Dibbits for this Q&A session. I hope everyone will, if not visit the Rijksmuseum, at least visit the Hercules Segers exhibition when it arrives at the Met in February next year. Will the Frans Post be traveling, or it's not planning?
No, Frans Post will not be traveling. We are doing a show on small boxwood sculptures, very beautiful small boxwood sculptures. That's now in Toronto and will come in March to the cloisters, and then go to the Rijksmuseum.
There's
So the Rijksmuseum is always here.
the Rijksmuseum is always transatlantic, is always beyond its walls, is one theme that's come out of this conversation. And finally, thank you all very much for coming this afternoon, evening, and hope you enjoy the rest of the fair.